My name is Evelyn Harper, and I am 10 years old living in the quiet town of Springfield in the United States of America. And I never thought that I would be the kind of person to have a secret life. But my fourth grade year changed everything for me. Because I realized that the world is not always a fair place, especially when the people who are supposed to be in charge are the ones causing all the trouble in my world. Things are usually pretty simple, because I spend most of my time reading books or drawing in the back of the classroom, and I try my best to be a good student because my parents always told me that education is the most important thing. But Springfield Elementary School was not exactly the paradise I hoped it would be. And the biggest problem in my life was a woman named Mrs. Gable, who was my mathematics teacher. And she was the kind of person who always smelled like old peppermint and heavy perfume, which would make my eyes water whenever she walked past my desk. But it was not just her smell that was the problem, because Mrs. Gable was extremely religious, and she let everyone know about it every single day. She had a large wooden cross hanging around her neck, and she would often talk about how she was doing the work of a higher power while she was teaching us long division. And she had a favorite student named Mason, who was the absolute worst boy I had ever met in my entire life. And Mason was a bully who would pull the hair of the girls sitting in front of him, and he would steal the pencils of the kids who were too afraid to stand up for themselves. But for some reason that I will never understand, Mrs. Gable thought that Mason was a perfect little angel who could do no wrong. And she would always make me sit next to him so that I could help him with his mathematics homework, even though Mason would whisper mean things to me while I was trying to explain how to carry the one or how to find the common denominator. And whenever I would try to tell Mrs. Gable that Mason was being mean, that he was not even trying to do the work, she would look at me with her cold blue eyes and tell me that I needed to have a more forgiving heart. Because I was Jewish, she often treated me like I was an outsider. And she would make comments about how I was missing out on the true path, and it made me feel like I was a stranger in my own classroom, even though I had lived in Springfield my entire life. And the situation started to get really bad when Mason realized that he could get away with anything as long as Mrs. Gable was watching over him, and he started to target me more often because he knew that I would not just sit there and take it like the other kids did. And I have always been the kind of person who stands up for what is right even if it gets me into trouble. And one Tuesday afternoon, while we were working on our multiplication tables, Mason took my favorite mechanical pencil and snapped it right in half just because he wanted to see me cry, but I did not cry because I was too angry. And when I told Mrs. Gable what he had done, she did not even look up from her Bible, and she just said that I should not be so attached to material things, and that maybe I had provoked him in some way that I did not realize. And then she looked me dead in the eye and said that my attitude was becoming a problem, and that she could see the darkness in my soul. And she actually called me the devil right in front of the whole class, and I could feel the heat rising in my face as all the other students stared at me, and Mason just sat there with a big smug grin on his face like he had won a prize. And from that day on, things only got worse, because Mrs. Gable started calling me the devil every time I made a mistake or every time I tried to defend myself against Mason. And she would say that I was a bad influence on the other children, and that I had a spirit of rebellion that needed to be broken. And I felt so alone because my parents were busy with work, and I did not want to worry them with stories about a mean teacher because I thought I could handle it on my own. But the breaking point came during our physical education class on a Friday afternoon, when the sun was shining through the high windows of the gymnasium, and the air smelled like old floor wax and sweaty sneakers, and we were supposed to be playing kickball. But Mason decided that he wanted to play a different game. And since I had a cast on my left arm from falling off my bicycle a few weeks earlier, I was supposed to be sitting on the sidelines, but Mason kept running past me and shoving me toward the floor, and he would do it when the physical education teacher was not looking. And after the third time he knocked me down, I felt a sharp pain in my arm, and I knew that I had had enough of his bullying and his mean spirit. And so when he came back around to shove me again, I did not fall down, but instead I stood my ground, and I swung my heavy plaster cast as hard as I could, and I caught him right in the ribs, and he went down like a sack of potatoes, and he started wailing and crying like he was the one who had been bullied for months. And of course, the physical education teacher saw the whole thing. And I was sent straight to the principal's office, which is a place that I had never been before in my entire life. And while I was sitting in the hard plastic chair, waiting for the principal to come back, I saw Mrs. Gable walking down the hallway, and she saw me, and she stopped in her tracks, and the look on her face was one of pure hatred, and she walked into the office and told the secretary that she knew this would happen because I was a child of the devil and that I was trying to destroy the peace of the school. And when my parents finally arrived, they were very disappointed in me because they only heard the version of the story where I attacked a poor defenseless boy with my cast. And I tried to explain what had happened, but Mrs. Gable had already talked to the principal, and she had convinced him that I was a troubled child with a violent streak, and I ended up getting suspended for 3 days, and I was grounded for 2 weeks, which meant no television and no books, and no going outside to play. And during those 2 weeks of sitting in my room, I had a lot of time to think about how unfair everything was. And I realized that being a good girl had got me nowhere, because Mrs. Gable was always going to see me as the villain no matter what I did. And if she wanted me to be the devil, then I decided that I was going to be the most clever and annoying devil she had ever encountered, and I started to formulate a plan that would take down both Mrs. Gable and Mason at the same time, and I knew that I had to be careful, because if I got caught, I would be in even more trouble than I was before, and so I waited until I went back to school, and I made sure to act as sweet as sugar whenever Mrs. Gable was around, and I would smile at her, and say yes ma'am, and no ma'am, and I would even offer to stay late to help clean the chalkboards, and she seemed to think that my suspension had finally broken my spirit, and she started to trust me again, or at least she stopped watching me like a hawk every second of the day. And that was exactly what I needed because I needed access to her school-issued email address, which I knew was written on the back of her teacher identification badge that she left on her desk during lunch breaks. And one day, while she was in the teacher's lounge eating her salad, I sneaked into the classroom, and I copied down her email address and her full name, and even the school's physical address, which I found on a stack of envelopes on her desk. And then I went to the school library during our free period, and I sat down at one of the computers in the very back corner, where the librarian could not see my screen, and I began my work of being the devil. And I started by searching for every single psychic and tarot card reading website I could find because I knew that Mrs. Gable hated that kind of thing more than anything else in the world, and she had once given a long lecture about how fortune tellers and mediums were the tools of the underworld. And so I signed her up for every free newsletter and every daily horoscope and every psychic reading consultation I could find, and I used her school email address for everything so that the messages would go straight to her professional account, where the school administrators might see them. And I did not stop there, because I found websites for crystal healing and aura cleansing, and even site that offered to cast spells for a small fee, and I checked the box that said send me more information for every single one of them. And I could almost imagine the look on her face when she opened her inbox the next morning and saw hundreds of emails from people claiming to be able to talk to the dead or predict the future. But that was only the first part of my plan, because I also had to deal with Mason. And I knew that the best way to get to him was through his grades, because Mrs. Gable was always bragging about how smart he was and how he was the top of the class in mathematics, even though I was the one doing all the work for him. And so when we were in class, and Mrs. Gable told me to help Mason with his long division, I started to purposefully mislead him. And I would tell him that 4 times 8 was 34, or that he should move the decimal point 3 places to the left instead of the right. And I did it with such a helpful and innocent face that he never suspected a thing because he was too lazy to actually check the work himself, and he just wrote down whatever I told him to write, and meanwhile I watched as Mrs. Gable's nerves started to fray, because she was spending more and more time at her computer looking confused and frustrated, and I would see her clicking the delete button over and over again with a look of pure horror on her face. And she started to look tired and jumpy, and she would jump every time the school intercom made a noise, and one afternoon I walked past her desk to turn in my homework, and I saw a glimpse of her screen, and it was filled with subject lines like "Your future is in the stars" and "Contact your spirit guides today." And she looked up at me, and for a moment I saw fear in her eyes instead of anger, and I just smiled at her as sweetly as I could, and I told her that I hoped she was having a wonderful day, and she just muttered something under her breath and went back to deleting emails. And as the weeks went by, the situation continued to escalate, because the more she deleted the emails, the more they seemed to multiply, because I was spending every afternoon at the public library, signing her up for even more obscure and strange services like ghost hunting equipment catalogs and ancient mystery school memberships. And I even found a website that would send her a daily quote from famous occultists. And it was working perfectly, because she was becoming convinced that she was under some kind of spiritual attack, and she started bringing small bottle of holy water to class, and she would sprinkle it on her keyboard when she thought no one was looking, and I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing out loud, because it was the funniest thing I had ever seen. And at the same time, Mason's mathematics grades were starting to plummet, because the tests were getting harder, and he did not have me there to whisper the right answers to him during the exams, and because I had been giving him the wrong information for weeks, he was completely confused about the basic rules of algebra, and when the midterm results came back, he had failed the test completely, and Mrs. Gable was devastated because she could not understand how her star pupil could have failed so badly. And she tried to blame me at first by saying that I must not have been helping him enough, but I reminded her that she had told me to be more forgiving, and that I had spent every single afternoon working with him, just like she asked, and I even showed her the practice sheets we had worked on together, where I had carefully written out the wrong formulas in my neatest handwriting, and she could not argue with me because it looked like I had been trying my best, and Mason was just too slow to understand it. And the pressure was really starting to get to her, because not only were her emails out of control, but her favorite student was failing, and she was starting to lose her reputation as the best teacher in the school, and one day things finally came to a head when the school's information technology department had to get involved because the volume of emails coming into Mrs. Gable's account was so high that it was starting to slow down the entire school server. And the head of the information technology department came into our classroom while we were in the middle of a lesson about fractions, and he told Mrs. Gable that they needed to take her computer away for a few days to investigate what was going on, and she looked like she was about to cry, and she started shouting about how she was being persecuted for her faith and how the forces of darkness were trying to silence her, and the whole class was silent as we watched our teacher have a total meltdown in front of us. And she was eventually escorted out of the room by the principal, who looked very concerned and embarrassed, and we had a substitute teacher for the rest of the week, which was great, because she actually let us read our books in peace, and she did not call anyone the devil or make us sit next to bullies. And while Mrs. Gable was gone, I felt a sense of peace that I had not felt all year, but I knew that I had to be careful because the investigation might lead back to me if I was not smart about it. And so I went to the library one last time, and I used a different computer to unsubscribe her from a few of the more harmless newsletters so that it would look like the information technology department's filters were working. And I also deleted the browsing history on the library computers just in case anyone decided to check. And when Mrs. Gable finally came back to school, she was a changed woman, and she was very quiet, and she did not talk about her religion anymore. And she definitely did not call me the devil, because she seemed to be afraid of me in some strange way. And she stopped making me sit next to Mason, and she moved his desk to the very back of the room where he could not bother anyone, and Mason's grades never recovered, because he was too far behind, and he ended up having to go to summer school to repeat the entire fourth grade mathematics curriculum, and I felt a little bit bad for him. But then I remembered all the times he had pushed me down and snapped my pencils, and I realized that he was just getting what he deserved. And the best part about the whole thing was that I never got caught, and no one ever suspected that a 10-year-old girl could be capable of such a complicated plan. And my parents were happy because my grades were excellent, and I was not getting into any more trouble. School, and they thought that I had learned my lesson about fighting, and in a way I had, because I learned that you do not always have to use your fists or your caste to win a fight, and sometimes the best way to deal with a bully or a mean teacher is to use your brain and stay one step ahead of them. And as the school year came to an end, I walked out of Mrs. Gable's classroom for the very last time, and I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders, and I looked back at her, and she was staring at her computer with a worried expression, and I just gave her a little wave and a sweet smile. And I knew that she would always wonder why her life had suddenly turned into a nightmare of psychics and tarot cards, and I knew that I would always have the secret knowledge that I was the one who did it. And as I walked home through the streets of Springfield, I thought about the future, and I knew that I was going to be just fine, because I had proven to myself that I was strong and smart, and that I could handle whatever life threw at me, even if it meant being a little bit of a devil every now and then. And the town of Springfield seemed a little bit brighter that day, and the air felt a little bit fresher. And I knew that I would never let anyone treat me like an outsider again, because I belonged here just as much as anyone else. And even though I am only 10 years old, I feel like I have lived 1,000 years in this one school year. And I have learned things that most adults do not even know yet, and I am proud of what I did because I stood up for myself, and I protected the other kids from a bully and a teacher who did not deserve her job. And that is the story of how I became the devil in 4th grade, and how I ended up being the hero of my own life. And I do not regret a single thing, because everything worked out exactly the way it was supposed to, and I am looking forward to 5th grade, where I hope things will be a little bit more normal. But if they are not, I know exactly what to do, and I know that I have the power to change my own destiny, and no one can take that away from me, not Mason, and not Mrs. Gable, and not anyone else in the whole world. And I will always remember the sound of the keyboard clicking as I signed her up for one last tarot reading, and the way the sun felt on my back as I walked away from the school. And I will always know that I am not the devil, but I am definitely someone you do not want to mess with if you are a bully or a mean teacher in the United States of America. Because I am Evelyn Harper, and I am a force to be reckoned with, and I will always find a way to make things right no matter what it takes. And that is the end of my story. But it is also the beginning of the rest of my life, where I am the one in charge, and I am the one who decides who I am going to be, and I am choosing to be someone who is kind and fair, but also someone who knows how to fight back when the situation calls for it. And I think that is the most important lesson of all, and I hope that other kids who are being bullied will hear my story and realize that they have power too, and that they do not have to just sit there and take it, because there is always a way to win if you are clever enough, and if you are willing to take a risk. And I am glad that I took that risk, because it changed everything for me, and it made me the person I am today, and I am proud of that person, and I am proud of my revenge because it was poetic and it was perfect, and it was exactly what needed to happen for justice be served in my 4th grade classroom. And now I can move on to bigger and better things, knowing that I have what it takes to survive and thrive in this world. And I am ready for whatever comes next, because I am stronger than I ever thought possible. And I am ready to take on the world one day at a time with a smile on my face and a secret in my heart. And I will always be the girl who proved her teacher right in the most unexpected way possible. And that is a victory that I will cherish for the rest of my life, and I will never forget the lesson I learned about power and justice, and the importance of standing up for yourself, even when the whole world seems to be against you, because in the end, the only person who can truly define who you are is you, and I have defined myself as a winner, and a survivor, and a girl who knows how to get exactly what she wants through patience and planning, and a little bit of mischief. And I think that is a pretty good way to be, and I am happy with how everything turned out in the end. Because I am Evelyn Harper, and I am the master of my own fate, and the captain of my own soul, and no one can ever take that away from me again. And I am ready to start my new normal where I am respected, and where I am free to be myself, without fear of being judged or being called names by people who do not even know me. And I am looking forward to the future with excitement and with hope, because I know that I have the strength to face anything, and I know that I am never alone as long as I have my own back and as long as I believe in myself. And that is the most important thing of all, and I am grateful for the experience even though it was hard, because it taught me who I really am, and it gave me the courage to be that person every single day of my life. And I will always be thankful for the 4th grade, and for Mrs. Gable, and even for Mason, because they helped me find my voice, and they helped me find my power, and I will never be the same again, and that is the best revenge of all, because I have outgrown them, and I have moved on to a life that is full of light and joy and truth, and I am never going back to that dark place again, because I am free, and I am happy, and I am exactly where I am supposed to be in the world today.